The observation port stretched before Commander Drax like a window into the void itself. 20 years of staring into that darkness had not diminished his capacity to remind him of his own insignificance. Or perhaps more accurately, it had
Your
taught
fragile
him what true
world ends
insignificance
here.
felt like.
Not while I
His
stand.
scales had grayed.
Then fall.
All four of his eyes, once sharp
All
enough
stations,
to count
report
the hull
status.
rivets on a
Target
ship
acquired.
at
Weapons
10,000
charged.
kilometers now
Engage.
required
Fire on
optical
my mark.
enhancement to read the sensor displays. 52 seconds. Old for a Krell warrior, ancient for one still breathing after what he had done. Observation Post 47 was not a punishment in the traditional sense. No chains, no cells, no executioners sharpening their implements in the adjacent room. Just him, a rotating staff of junior officers who looked at him with barely concealed pity and an endless parade of ships passing through this corridor of space. And the white ships. Always the white ships. Sir? Ensign Rethik's voice carried that particular quality of youth that Drax had once possessed back when the universe seemed smaller and enemies more obvious. The young Krell couldn't have been more than 3 cycles out of the academy. His scales still held their brightness unmarred by combat or age. Vessel approaching on Vector 77 Delta. Classification reads as non-military. Drax did not need to look at the display. He could feel it in the way the temperature seemed to drop 3 degrees, in the way his primary heart began beating just slightly faster than his secondary, in the way his claws unconsciously flexed seeking a weapon that was not there and had not been there for 2 decades. Describe it, he said, though he already knew. Large, sir, massive actually, easily twice the displacement of a heavy cruiser. Rithik paused and Drax could hear the confusion in his voice. It's white, Commander. Pure white, and there are markings on the hull, red symbols. They look like crosses. Drax's voice came out rougher than he intended. They are crosses, Ensign. Red crosses on a white field. Do you know what they mean? The young Krell hesitated. Drax could hear it in his breathing, that moment of uncertainty when training collides with curiosity. The human medical insignia, sir. It indicates a hospital ship. And what? Drax asked, turning slowly from the viewport to fix all 4 eyes on the ensign. Is our protocol regarding such vessels? Minimum distance of 10,000 kilometers, sir. No active scans, no weapons locks, no communication unless initiated by them. Rithik recited it perfectly as he should. The regulation had been drilled into every Krell officer for the past 20 years. Violation results in immediate court-martial and execution. Do you know why, Ensign? Because the Nightingale Protocol Treaty forbids hostile action against properly marked medical vessels, sir. That is the legal answer. Drax moved closer to the young officer, close enough to see the scales on his neck ridge standing slightly on end. Good. Fear was the beginning of wisdom. I asked if you know why, not what the regulation states, why it exists. Rethik's secondary eyes flickered with uncertainty. I don't understand the distinction, sir. Of course he didn't. How could he? He had been a hatchling when it happened, too young to remember the broadcasts, the trials, the fundamental reshaping of galactic military doctrine that followed a single engagement in a forgotten sector of space. Let me tell you a story, Ensign. Drax settled into his chair, the one luxury this posting allowed him in. About the day I learned why you never, under any circumstances, fire upon a ship marked with red crosses. The younger Krell's posture shifted. Stories from veterans were either boring recitations of minor skirmishes or warnings disguised as entertainment. Drax could see him trying to decide which this would be. 20 years ago, Drax began, I commanded the Talon of Supremacy. He watched recognition dawn in Rethik's eyes. Even young officers knew that name. It was in the history files, the tactical databases, the cautionary primers taught at the academy. I was 32 cycles old, prime of my career, 3 successful campaigns, 2 commendations, a crew that would follow me into a singularity if I ordered it. The memories tasted like ash. I thought I understood warfare. I thought I understood humans. Drax gestured at the viewport where the white ship continued its serene passage through the void. I was wrong about everything. The bridge of the Talon of Supremacy hummed with the controlled efficiency that marked a warship at the peak of its operational capability. Every station manned, every system green, every crew member aware that they served on one of the Dominion's premier vessels under one of its most promising commanders. Commander Drax stood at the center of it all, feeling the weight of command settle across his shoulders like a comfortable cloak. This was where he belonged. This was what he had trained for. This was what the Krell were meant to do: patrol the borders, maintain superiority, remind the lesser species that some things were eternal. Status, he said, his voice carrying the particular timbre that commanded instant attention without needing to shout. Lieutenant Kieran looked up from the tactical station, his scales still bright with the sheen of youth. 3 cycles of service. Promising officer. Perhaps too eager to please, but that could be trained out of him. Sector sweep is 70% complete, Commander. No contacts of significance. Standard merchant traffic, 2 civilian transports, 1 Torvin cargo hauler that cleared our checkpoint 6 hours ago. Energy readings. Background nominal, no unusual signatures, no gravitic distortions, no unscheduled FTL transitions. Kieran's claws danced across his console with practiced precision. It's been a quiet patrol, sir. Too quiet, Drax thought, but did not say. The border had been too quiet for 3 cycles now, ever since the skirmish at Proxima Station. The humans had retreated. The Torvin Confederacy had withdrawn. Even the usually aggressive Zethar clans had pulled back to their territories. Some in high command called it peace. Drax called it suspicious. At the helm station, pilot Vorath made a minor course correction, his movements economical and precise. Vorath was one of the best helmsmen in the fleet, young, talented, with reflexes that bordered on precognitive. Drax had specifically requested him for this posting. Maintain full sensor sweep, Drax ordered. I want to know about every particle of dust that crosses our boundary. Yes, sir. Sergeant Morven, positioned at the defensive systems station, cleared his throat. The sound carried weight. Morven had earned the scars that crisscrossed his snout through 15 cycles of combat operations. When he spoke, smart commanders listened. Something on your mind, Sergeant? Permission to speak freely, sir. Granted. Morven swiveled his chair to face Drax directly, a breach of protocol that the commander allowed because the veteran had forgotten more about warfare than most officers would ever learn. The quiet bothers me, Commander. After Proxima, I expected escalation. Instead, we get this. He gestured at the peaceful sensor displays. Silence. You think they're planning something? I think humans don't do anything without a reason, sir. Morven's scarred face twisted into something that might have been a grimace or a smile. And when they stop fighting, it's usually because they're preparing to fight differently. Drax considered this. It aligned with his own instincts, though he would not voice them to the full bridge crew. Confidence was half of command. Your concern is noted, Sergeant. Remain vigilant. Always, sir. The bridge settled back into its routine rhythm. Sensor sweeps, system checks, course corrections. The endless, meticulous work of maintaining a warship at the edge of known space. 27 minutes later, everything changed. Contact, Kieran announced, his voice sharp with sudden alertness. Bearing 270 Mark 15. Range, long, very long. Sensors are having trouble resolving it. Drax moved to the tactical display, Morven rising from his station to join him. The holographic projection showed their ship at the center, the boundary markers of Krell space, forming a glowing perimeter. And there, just inside that perimeter, a faint signature that pulsed with each sensor sweep. Identification. Unknown. Sir, the signature is odd. Massive power output, but the profile doesn't match any known warship class. Kieran enhanced the image, frowning as the data resolved. It's big, Commander, really big. Displacement suggests it's at least twice our mass. A ripple of interest moved through the bridge crew. Ships that large were rare in this sector. Cargo haulers occasionally. Civilian transports never. Warships. Battle stations, Drax ordered, and the bridge transformed. Klaxons wailed their 2-note warning. Hatches sealed with hydraulic hisses. Crew members who had been performing routine maintenance sprinted to their combat positions. Vorath's hands moved over his controls, ready to execute evasive maneuvers at a moment's notice. Weapons hot, Morven reported, his claws already working the defensive array. Shields charging, point defense active. Communications hail that vessel. Standard challenge. They're in Krell space without authorization. The communications officer, Sileth, worked her console with the efficiency of someone who had issued 1,000 such challenges. Hailing on all standard frequencies, Commander. No response. Keep trying. Tactical, I want full resolution on that contact. What are we dealing with? Kieran's frustration was evident in the set of his shoulders. Sensors are being strange, sir. The ship is there, no question. But it's like it's designed to be visible. Like it wants us to see it. Explain. And the radar cross-section is huge, Commander. No stealth coding, no deflection systems, no attempt to minimize its signature. In fact, Kieran looked up, his eyes wide. Sir, it's painted white. Silence fell across the bridge. Not the comfortable silence of routine operations, but the sharp, crystalline quiet of sudden comprehension. White, Drax repeated. Confirmed, sir. Visual spectrum analysis shows the hull is highly reflective, predominantly white in coloration. And there are markings, large markings, red symbols covering multiple sections of the hull. Drax felt something cold settle in his chest. Show me. The main viewport shifted from its standard tactical overlay to a direct visual feed. The image was grainy at this range, distorted by distance and the limitations of optical systems, but it was clear enough. The ship hung in space like a monument to absurdity, massive as Kieran had reported. Easily twice the Talon's displacement, possibly more. But it was the color that caught the eye and held it. Pure white. Not the gray white of unpainted hull metal or the off-white of standard civilian vessels, but a deliberate, almost aggressive whiteness that seemed to glow against the black of space. And painted across that pristine hull, visible even at this distance, were symbols. Red symbols. Crosses. Medical crosses. Magnify, Drax ordered, his voice steady despite the sudden acceleration of his hearts. The image zoomed and the symbols resolved into clarity. Yes, crosses. The universal symbol of medicine, of healing, of neutrality. The mark that supposedly protected ships from attack under a dozen different treaties and conventions. It's a hospital ship, Kieran said, his voice carrying a note of confusion. A human hospital ship. What's it doing in our territory? Morven's response was immediate and sharp. Permission to speak, sir. Granted. We should maintain distance. There are stories about engaging human medical vessels. The veteran's scarred face had taken on an expression Drax had never seen there before. Something that looked uncomfortably like caution. From the Vraxian War, the humans have certain rules about protecting their medical facilities. Rules, Drax said, tasting the word like something bitter. You mean the Geneva Conventions? Yes, sir. They're laws of warfare. They take them very seriously. And we should care because, Drax turned to face his sergeant directly. Those treaties protect their ships when they're in their own space following their own rules. This vessel is in Krell territory unannounced and unauthorized. That makes it a trespasser at best, a spy at worst. Oh, sir, I understand that, but nothing, Sergeant. Drax straightened to his full height. I've read the intelligence reports on humans. I know what the other species say about them. Dangerous, unpredictable, fierce warriors when cornered. He gestured at the white ship on the display. Does that look like a warship to you? The question hung in the air. Morven opened his mouth closed. It looked at the display again, because it didn't look like a warship. It looked like exactly what it claimed to be, a massive unarmed medical vessel. No gun ports were visible, no missile tubes, no obvious weapon systems at all. Just white hull red crosses in the kind of configuration that suggested cargo holds and medical bays, not magazines and reactors. It looks like a hospital ship, sir, Kieran offered quietly. Exactly. Drax felt vindication warm his chest. The humans talk an impressive game about their military prowess. But when you actually look at them, what do you see? A species so soft they build ships dedicated entirely to caring for their wounded. So obsessed with rules and conventions that they mark their medical vessels with bright colors and hope everyone else follows the same regulations. He shook his head. That's not strength. That's weakness disguised as virtue. Silith's voice cut through the moment. Commander, still no response to our hails. The vessel maintains its current heading and speed. It's not slowing, not changing course. It's like they don't even know we're here. Or like they don't care, a small voice whispered in the back of Drax's mind. He silenced it. Range, 50,000 kilometers, and closing, sir. Weapons range. Morven's response was reluctant. We could hit them now if we wanted to. At that size, missing would be difficult. Drax walked a slow circle around the tactical display, considering his options. By the strictest interpretation of Krell law, he had every right to fire on an unauthorized vessel in their territory. By any reasonable military doctrine, a ship that refused to respond to hails and continued advancing could be considered hostile. But it was a hospital ship. Even he could see the complications that would follow from destroying a clearly marked medical vessel. Unless... Weapons, he said slowly, an idea forming. Prepare a warning shot. Plasma bank's single bolt minimum power. I want it close enough that they notice, but far enough that there's no risk of impact. Sir, Kieran's confusion was evident. We're not going to shoot them, Lieutenant. We're going to wake them up. They're either ignoring us deliberately or their sensors are so poor they genuinely haven't noticed us. Either way, a plasma bolt across their bow should get their attention. Then they'll respond to our hails, explain what they're doing in our space, and we can all move on with our day. It was, Drax thought, a perfectly reasonable escalation, a standard military procedure. Fire a warning shot, establish communication, resolve the situation diplomatically if possible, forcefully if necessary. Morven's voice carried a warning tone. Commander, I must advise against this course of action. Your objection is noted and overruled, Sergeant. Drax kept his voice firm, but not harsh. Morven deserved respect for his experience, but that didn't mean Drax had to take his advice. This is not a combat engagement. It's a warning, a very clear, very obvious warning. Sir, the Vraxians tried something similar during their conflict with humans. There was a medical ship they fired warning shots and the Vraxians lost that war, Sergeant, badly. Because they fought humans in open combat fleet strength against strength. That was their mistake. Drax gestured at the white ship. We're not fighting anyone. We're establishing our authority over our own territory. There's a difference. Silence answered him. Not agreement, but the silence of subordinates who had made their objections known and been overruled. It was the sound of professional military discipline overriding personal doubt. Weapons, Drax said again. Fire when ready. The bridge held its breath. The plasma cannon spoke. A bolt of superheated energy lanced across the void, brilliant against the darkness. It was beautiful in a way, Drax thought. A perfect line of light connecting one ship to another. A warning written in fire. The bolt crossed the hospital ship's bow with perhaps 500 meters to spare. Close enough that any competent sensor operator would have detected it. Close enough that any crew would have felt their blood turn cold at the near miss. Close enough to be unmistakable. The white ship continued on its course, serene and unbothered. No reaction. Syleth reported her hearing ridges twitching with confusion. No evasive maneuvers, no shield activation, no return fire, no communication at all. Drax frowned. They had to have seen that. Sensors show their systems are active, sir. They should have detected the plasma discharge. But there's no response. Kieran looked up from his console, uncertainty written across his features. Commander, is it possible they don't have anyone on the bridge? Could it be automated? A hospital ship running on automation. Morven's voice carried skepticism. With thousands of patients aboard, unlikely. Then they're ignoring us, Drax said, feeling irritation spark into anger. They're deliberately refusing to acknowledge our authority. Morven said quietly, they're waiting to see what we'll do. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Drax turned to face his sergeant, meeting all four eyes directly. You think this is a test? I think humans are rarely as simple as they appear, sir. I think you're giving them too much credit. Drax turned back to the viewport, studying the white ship. It continued its approach as steady and unhurried, peaceful, innocent, completely maddeningly unresponsive. They're medical personnel, doctors and nurses. They probably don't even know proper military protocol. Sir, fire another warning shot, weapons. Closer this time. Let's see if proximity improves their hearing. This time, Morven said nothing. His silence was louder than any objection. The second plasma bolt screamed across the void this time, with only 50 meters of clearance. Close enough that if the hospital ship had shields, they should have flickered to life. Close enough that any sane captain would be shouting into their communications systems, demanding to know who was firing on them. The white ship sailed on imperturbable as a moon. Still nothing, Syleth reported. Her voice had taken on a note of something that might have been concern. No hails, no distress signals, no shield activation. It's like no one is home. Someone is home, Drax growled. They're just too arrogant to respond, or too stupid. Commander. Kieran's voice was careful, the tone of someone about to say something their superior didn't want to hear. Perhaps we should let them pass. They're clearly not a military threat. If we report this to high command, they can lodge a formal protest through diplomatic channels. We don't need to escalate. This is our territory, Lieutenant. Our space, our authority. Drax heard his voice rising and forced it back to a professional register. I am not going to let a human medical barge drift through Krell space like they own it. They will acknowledge us or they will face the consequences. What consequences, sir? The question came from Morven, and it was not a challenge, but a genuine inquiry. Drax turned to look at the veteran sergeant, seeing the scars, the age, the experience written in every line of that weathered face. What would you do, Sergeant, if you were in command? I would maintain distance and observe, Morven said without hesitation. I would not engage, I would not provoke, and I would definitely not fire on a clearly marked medical vessel, no matter how frustrating their lack of response might be. Because of the Geneva Conventions. Because of common sense, sir. Morven's eyes held steady. The conventions exist for a reason. Every major species in the galaxy respects them even in wartime. Medical facilities are sacrosanct. Medical ships are protected. These are not arbitrary rules, Commander. They're the foundation of civilized warfare. Civilized warfare, Drax repeated. There's no such thing, Sergeant. There's victory and defeat. Everything else is just window dressing. He turned to the weapon station. Target their engines. Disable them. No casualties, just a mobility kill. We'll tow them to the nearest station, impound the ship, and let the diplomats sort it out. The bridge fell into a different kind of silence. This was not disapproval or concern. This was the moment when a crew realizes their commander has made a decision and there's no talking them out of it. Vorath at his helm station looked back over his shoulder. The young pilot's expression was troubled, but he said nothing. He had learned early that speaking out of turn was a career-limiting move. Weapons locked, Morven reported, his voice flat. Targeting aft propulsion section. Which fire? 3 plasma bolts hammered into the hospital ship's stern in rapid succession. The impacts bloomed across the white hull like flowers of destruction, scorching the pristine paint and sending debris spinning into space. For a moment, Drax allowed himself to feel satisfaction. There. Done. The ship would lose propulsion drift to a stop and finally acknowledge their presence. The bridge crew watched their sensors, waiting for the inevitable. The power fluctuations. The venting atmosphere. The distress signals. None came. Report, Drax ordered. Kieran stared at his console like it had personally betrayed him. Sir, the vessel's power signature hasn't decreased. If anything, it's increased dramatically. Explain. I can't, sir. We hit their engine section. We should have caused significant damage, but the power readings show a 200% increase in output, and it's not coming from the engines. Then where's it coming from? Kieran's claws trembled over his controls. I don't know, sir. The energy is building in sections that our initial scans read as cargo holds in medical bays. But those readings don't make sense. No medical equipment draws that much power. No cargo generates that kind of signature. Morven's voice cut through the confusion like a blade. Commander, I recommend immediate withdrawal. Based on what energy readings? Based on experience, sir. The sergeant's scarred face had gone very still. I've seen this before in the Vraxian War. The power spike. The apparent damage that isn't damage. The silence that's not really silence. What are you saying, Sergeant? I'm saying that ship is not what it appears to be. As if in response to his words, the alarms began to scream. Energy spike. Kieran's voice cracked like a hatchling's. Massive energy spike across multiple sections of the target vessel. Power output is off the charts. I repeat, off the charts. Drax spun to face the viewport, and what he saw made every scale on his body stand on end. The hospital ship was changing. Panels along its pristine white hull were sliding open, retracting into hidden compartments with the kind of mechanical precision that spoke of military engineering. Not civilian construction, not improvised modifications. Purpose-built, designed, planned. And behind those panels in recessed sections that had been completely invisible moments before, things were emerging. Large things, weapon-shaped things, things that were beginning to glow with power signatures that made the Talon's own weapons look like training equipment. What in the name of the void? Drax whispered. Sir, I'm reading weapon systems, Kieran said, and his voice was climbing higher with each word. Multiple weapon systems, point defense cannons, missile batteries, energy projectors, and something big, something really big in the central dorsal section. Power draw is climbing to levels I've never seen outside of a planetary defense platform. Syleth's hearing ridges went flat against her skull, a Krell sign of absolute terror. Sir, we're being scanned. Active targeting solutions are being calculated. Multiple target locks acquiring. That's impossible. Drax heard himself say the words, but they sounded hollow even to his own ears. That's a hospital ship. It's protected under human law. They can't arm hospital ships. It's against their own rules. Well, Morven said, his voice carrying a terrible, weary knowledge, someone forgot to tell them that. On the viewport, more sections of white hull were transforming. What had appeared to be simple cargo modules were rotating, revealing reinforced armor plating beneath. What had looked like sensor arrays were pivoting into position as point defense systems. The entire ship was metamorphosing from a peaceful medical vessel into something that made Drax's warship look like a patrol boat. The central dorsal section, the area Kieran had flagged as the big problem, was opening. A massive armored hatch easily 100 meters across was splitting down the middle, with the kind of heavy engineering that took years to design and cost more than most planets' gross domestic product. And rising from within that hatch, emerging like some ancient god of war waking from slumber, was a weapon that made Drax's blood turn to ice water. "Is that?" Kieran began, his voice barely a whisper. "A railgun," Morven finished. "A capital-class railgun." The weapon continued to rise, its barrel easily 50 meters long, built from some dark alloy that seemed to drink in the light around it. Capacitors along its length were beginning to glow, cycling up through the spectrum. Blue at first, then brighter, then cycling toward white. "Shields," Drax screamed, finally finding his voice. "Maximum power to forward shields, all power to forward shields." "Already done, sir," Morven reported. His voice had gone calm, the terrible calm of someone who had accepted what was about to happen. "For what it's worth. Weapons return fire, target that railgun before it—" "Sir," Silith interrupted, her voice completely flat, emotionless. The tone of someone who had already accepted death. "We're being hailed by the hospital ship." Drax stared at her. "They're what? Hailing us, sir. Audio only. The message is looping. Would you like me to play it?" The railgun's glow had reached white hot, the kind of white that hurt to look at, the kind of white that meant barely contained catastrophic energy, looking for a target. "Yes," Drax croaked. "Play it." Selith pressed a control, and a human voice filled the bridge. Female. Calm. With an accent that suggested education and authority. But underneath that calm was something else. Something cold and furious, and absolutely, completely terrifyingly done with the Krell's nonsense. "Attention, Krell vessel. This is Captain Alara Voss of the UHMS Serenity's Guard. You have fired upon a protected medical vessel in violation of interstellar law. You have precisely 10 seconds to power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Failure to comply will result in your immediate destruction. This is your only warning." The message clicked off, then began again. The same words, the same cold professional tone, the same promise of annihilation delivered with the emotional weight of someone reading a weather report. Drax looked at the railgun, now glowing white-hot with barely contained destructive potential. He looked at his crew, who were all staring at him with expressions that clearly said, "This is your fault." He looked at the chronometer, which had automatically begun counting down from 10, 9, 8, 7. Voreth's hands hovered over his helm controls, waiting for the evasive maneuver order that might give them a chance to survive. And for the first time in his 32 cycles of life, Commander Drax of the Krell Dominion understood what it meant to be truly, utterly, catastrophically wrong about everything. The countdown reached 0. Drax opened his mouth to give the order. Surrender. Power down. Anything to stop what was about to happen. His vocal cords engaged. Air moved through his throat. Sound began to form. He was too slow. The railgun fired. There was no dramatic buildup, no warning klaxon. No final moment of cinematic suspense. 1 microsecond, the weapon was charged and ready. The next microsecond, the projectile was leaving the barrel at a significant fraction of light speed. The laws of physics did not care about dramatic tension. What Drax saw was a line, a perfectly straight line of distorted space that connected the hospital ship to his own vessel. The air itself seemed to tear along that path, reality bending around, something moving so fast that conventional matter simply got out of the way. Light from distant stars twisted and warped along the projectile's trajectory, creating a gravitational lensing effect that made the universe itself seem to ripple. What he heard was nothing, because the sound had not had time to register yet. What he felt was the talon of supremacy lurching violently to starboard as something punched through it with the delicacy of a meteor strike. Then the sound caught up, and the screaming started. "Hull breach!" Kieran shrieked over the cacophony of alarms. "Hull breach on decks 4 through 7, casualties. Oh, stars, we have lost. We have lost over 200 crew." The railgun's projectile, a solid slug of tungsten carbide alloy, weighing approximately 2 tons, had entered the Talon's hull just after the bridge section. It had passed through the crew quarters at a velocity that turned titanium bulkheads into vapor. Through the secondary weapons control, where 12 Krell had been running final system checks. Through the portside auxiliary generator room. Through 3 different corridors filled with personnel who had been sprinting to battle stations. Pilot Voreth had been in one of those corridors carrying an urgent message from engineering. The slug had passed within centimeters of him, the kinetic shockwave alone enough to liquefy internal organs. He had not even had time to scream. The projectile had not slowed down. It had not fragmented. It had simply punched a perfectly circular hole through the ship and continued on into space, probably not stopping until it hit something several star systems away. The people in its path had not been killed. That word was too gentle, too civilized. They had been erased, vaporized by kinetic energy that exceeded the combustion temperatures of small stars, turned into component atoms and scattered across the cosmos like dust. Drax gripped his command throne as the ship shuddered again. Emergency bulkheads were slamming shut with hydraulic violence. Atmosphere was venting into space through the wounds in his ship's hull, screaming as it went. Somewhere below, crew members were drowning in vacuum. Damage report. His voice came out steadier than he felt. Training. Decades of training taking over when conscious thought failed. Morven's claws worked the defensive console with mechanical precision, his scarred face illuminated by red emergency lighting. Decks 4 through 7 opened to space. Emergency seals are holding on adjacent sections, but we're venting atmo on multiple levels. Casualties confirmed at 219. Medical teams are responding, but he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Among the dead pilot Vorath, aged 24 cycles, one of the best helmsmen in the fleet, Drax had written the letter recommending him for this posting, had praised his reflexes, his dedication, his bright future. Now Vorath's atoms were drifting somewhere between stars. Weapons, Drax demanded. Can we return fire? All forward batteries operational, sir. Targeting solutions locked. Morven looked up, and for the first time in 15 cycles of service together, Drax saw fear in those scarred eyes. But Commander, I must advise. Fire, Drax roared. All weapons, everything we have. Return fire now. Morven's hesitation lasted perhaps half a second. Then training overrode doubt and his claws danced across the weapons console. The talon of supremacy spoke with every plasma cannon it possessed. Dozens of bolts hammered toward the hospital ship in a full broadside that should have overwhelmed any defensive system ever designed. The kind of barrage that could reduce a heavy cruiser to molten slag. The kind of firepower that made the Krell Dominion's military reputation. The point defense cannons that had emerged from the Serenity's guard opened up with surgical precision. Streams of hypersonic projectiles intercepted every single plasma bolt, every one. The defensive fire moved with inhuman speed and accuracy, each burst calculated to detonate the incoming energy weapons at precisely the right distance and angle to dissipate their destructive potential harmlessly into space. The white hull of the hospital ship did not even get scorched. No effect, Morven reported, his voice empty of everything except professional detachment. Sir, their point defense is too accurate, too fast. We cannot land a hit. Missiles, Drax said. The word came out hoarse, strained through a throat that had suddenly gone dry. Launch missiles, everything we have. They can't intercept that many. The Talon's missile bays opened with mechanical efficiency. 60 self-guided warheads screamed toward their target, each one capable of cracking a battleship's armor. Each one equipped with terminal guidance systems that could adjust trajectory 1,000 times per second. Each one representing the culmination of Krell weapons technology. Surely, Drax thought, and he could hear the desperation in his own internal monologue, surely the point defense could not stop that many. He was wrong. The hospital ship's defensive systems switched targets with the kind of speed that suggested computer control operating at quantum processing levels. More weapons emerged from hidden ports along the white hull. These fired tight beam lasers that sliced through missile after missile with contemptuous ease. 8 seconds. That was how long it took. 8 seconds to reduce 60 state-of-the-art missiles into expanding clouds of debris and unfulfilled potential. Not a single warhead got within 10 kilometers of the target. Evasive maneuvers, Drax screamed, abandoning all pretense of calm command. Helm, get us out of here. But the helm station was empty. Vorath was gone, vaporized in the first strike. The backup helmsman, Ensign Zortak, scrambled into the seat with trembling claws, his inexperience evident in every movement. The Talon of Supremacy began to turn its engines, flaring to maximum burn, trying to bring its armored bow toward the enemy while simultaneously building the velocity needed to escape. It was the right tactical decision. The correct response according to every manual, every training simulation, every doctrine the Krell military had developed over centuries of warfare. It was also far too late. The railgun fired again. This time Drax saw it differently, his brain operating in that strange slow-motion clarity that comes with absolute terror process details that conscious thought should have missed. He saw the projectile leave the barrel. Not the projectile itself, nothing could track something moving at that velocity, but the distortion it created. Space itself seemed to bend around the tungsten slug gravitational lensing, creating a visible ripple in the fabric of reality. Light from distant stars twisted and warped along the projectile's path, creating an effect like looking through flawed glass. It was in a terrible way beautiful. The slug hit the Talon's starboard engine dead center. The result was instantaneous and catastrophic. The fusion reactor that powered the engine suffered a containment failure. For 1 microsecond, a miniature sun bloomed inside the Talon's engineering section. Temperatures that normally existed only in the cores of stars vaporized 200 more crew members. The explosion tore away a third of the ship's thrust capability and sent the vessel into a violent spin. Drax was thrown from his command throne. He hit the deck hard enough to crack scales, tasted blood, felt something in his left arm snap like a dried twig. Pain lanced up to his shoulder, white-hot and consuming. He scrambled back to his feet in time to see Zortax desperately trying to compensate for the spin, his claws leaving gouges in his console as he fought with controls that no longer wanted to respond. "We have lost primary maneuvering," Kieran shouted, his voice raw. "Structural integrity down to 40%, life support failing on decks 8 through 12. Casualty count is," he swallowed hard. "Casualty count is 541 and climbing." 541. Out of a crew of 2,000 in less than 90 seconds. This was not warfare. This was extermination. "Surrender," as Drax said, then louder, forcing the word past pride in training and everything he had ever believed about strength. "Surrender, open all channels. Broadcast our surrender." Syleth worked her console with shaking claws. "Channel open, Commander." Drax took a breath. His broken arm sent spikes of agony through his nervous system with each inhalation, but he forced his voice to remain steady. "To maintain dignity in defeat. This is Commander Drax of the Krell Dominion warship, Talon of Supremacy." The words tasted like ash and bile. "We surrender. Cease fire. We surrender unconditionally. Our weapons are powering down. We are not a threat. Please, please stop shooting." Silence fell across the bridge, not peaceful silence, not even the stunned silence of defeat. This was the silence of trauma, of minds trying to process something too large to comprehend. The only sounds were the warning klaxons, quieter now, as damaged systems failed and their alarms went silent with them, the hiss of venting atmosphere and the quiet sobbing of Zortax at his station. Then Captain Alara Voss's voice returned, filling the bridge through the comm system. It was colder than before, if that was even possible. "Surrender acknowledged, Commander Drax." For one moment, one brief, irrational moment, Drax felt something like hope. Then Voss continued speaking, and that hope died stillborn. "However, I feel it is important that you understand exactly what you have done here today." On the viewport, the railgun was cycling again, capacitors glowing, energy building, that terrible progression through the spectrum toward white. "No," Drax said the word barely a whisper. "No, wait, we surrendered. You have to honor our surrender." "Oh, I will," Voss replied, and her voice carried the kind of smile that promised pain. "But first, Commander, you are going to learn a very important lesson about human medical vessels." The railgun reached full charge. "We take the protection of our wounded very, very seriously, and when someone violates that protection—" She paused, and Drax could hear her breathing across the vast gulf of space that separated their ships. "We respond with what we call proportional force. Captain Voss, please. Consider this your education, Commander." Drax closed all four of his eyes and prayed to gods he had not believed in since childhood. The railgun fired for the third time. The projectile grazed the top of the Talon's hull, tearing away antenna arrays, sensor clusters, and the captain's personal escape pod. The message was clear and unmistakable. "You are not leaving." "All weapons offline," Morven reported, his voice carrying the flat affect of shock. "Shields at 6% and falling." "Sir, we are defenseless." "I know that," Drax snapped, then caught himself. Yelling at his crew would not help. Nothing would help. They were at the mercy of a hospital ship, which was somehow the most humiliating sentence he had ever thought. He straightened as much as his broken arm would allow. "Captain Voss, please. We have surrendered. We acknowledge our mistake. What more do you want?" The pause that followed was long enough that Drax wondered if she had decided to simply finish them off, to reduce his ship to drifting wreckage and let them all die slowly in the cold of space. When her voice returned, the professional calm was gone. This time Captain Alara Voss was angry. "What do I want? What do I want, Commander?" Each word was bitten off, chewed, and spit out with barely controlled fury. "I want you to understand what you did. I want you to comprehend the magnitude of your stupidity." A pause, breathing, the sound of someone wrestling their emotions back under control. So let me educate you. Since your species apparently skipped the class on basic interstellar law. On the viewport, the hospital ship had stopped its transformation. All of its weapons were tracking the Talon, but they were not firing. Not yet. The white hull gleamed against the black of space pristine, except for the faint scorch marks where Drax's initial plasma bolts had struck. The Geneva Conventions, Voss continued, her voice taking on the cadence of a lecture, are a series of treaties that govern the conduct of warfare. They protect prisoners of war. They protect civilians. And most relevantly to your current situation, Commander, they protect medical personnel and facilities from attack. Drax wanted to speak, to object, to say something, but his voice had abandoned him. Hospital ships are not valid military targets. Ever. Under any circumstances. This is not a suggestion, Commander. This is law. Law that has stood for over 400 years across 73 ratifying species. But you're armed, Drax finally managed to croak out, gesturing desperately at the viewport with his good arm. You have weapons that could destroy a fleet. How is that legal? The laugh that came through the comm system was bitter and sharp as broken glass. Because we are allowed to defend ourselves when idiots like you decide to ignore several centuries of established protocol. Voss's voice rose, then caught itself modulating back down to that terrible professional calm. Hospital ships are protected, Commander. But that protection is not a suicide pact. A new screen appeared on the Talon's main display. Text, legal documentation, articles, and clauses and subsections that Drax's eyes were too pain-blurred to read properly. But he could make out the header, Geneva Convention, Second Protocol, Article 35, Space Warfare Addendum. We are permitted, Voss said, her voice steady again, under Article 35 of the Second Geneva Convention, as adapted for space warfare, to carry defensive armaments sufficient to ensure our survival if attacked. The key word here being defensive. Kieran's voice was small, confused. But sir, that railgun is not defensive. That's a capital ship weapon that could level cities. Yes, Voss said, apparently able to hear them through their own comm system. Yes, it could. And do you know why we installed it? Silence answered her. Because 3 years ago, a Krell raiding party, much like yours, attacked the UHMS Florence's Promise. The name meant nothing to Drax, just another human ship. Another casualty in the endless border conflicts that had defined the last decade of galactic politics. But Morven's reaction was immediate and visceral. The veteran sergeant's scales went pale, his claws frozen over his console. Oh no, Morven whispered. Oh no, not that ship. That hospital ship, Voss continued, and her voice had dropped to something quiet and infinitely more dangerous. Was not armed. It relied entirely on the protections of interstellar law. It was carrying 4,000 wounded personnel from the Battle of Kepler Station, 4,000 souls who had been guaranteed safe passage under every treaty, every convention, every law that governs civilized warfare. The bridge went silent. Even the alarms seemed to hold their breath. The Krell raiding party boarded the Florence's Promise. They executed the medical staff, doctors, nurses, surgeons, orderlies, people who had dedicated their lives to healing, shot them in their own medical bays. Drax felt something cold and heavy settle in his stomach. And then they spaced the wounded, all 4,000 of them, opened the airlocks, and vented them into the void, men and women who had been promised protection, who had been guaranteed safety under laws that every species in this galaxy claims to honor. Voss's voice had gone very quiet now, the kind of quiet that precedes thunder. And then, and this is the part that really matters, Commander, they claimed it was a legitimate military target because the Florence had been treating enemy combatants, because we had been doing our job as medical personnel, saving lives without regard to species or allegiance. Drax remembered now. He remembered the broadcasts, the celebrations in the Dominion, the medals awarded to Assault Group 12. High Command had called it a great victory, a blow against human supply lines. A demonstration that the Krell would not be constrained by weak-minded rules about protected spaces. He had applauded it. He had thought it was brilliant strategy. Your High Command celebrated, DeVos said as if reading his thoughts. They called it innovative tactics. They said the Florence's Promise had forfeited its protection by treating your enemies. A pause. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of something that could never be forgiven. So humanity made a decision. We would continue to honor the Geneva Conventions. We would continue to operate hospital ships. We would continue to provide medical care to anyone who needed it. Enemy or ally, it makes no difference to us. That is what we do. That is what we have always done. On the display, more images appeared. Schematics, engineering diagrams, weapons specifications that made the Talon's armaments look like training equipment. But we would also ensure that no one would ever massacre our medical personnel again. So we armed our hospital ships, heavily. We installed railguns that can punch through battle cruisers, point defense systems that can intercept anything short of a relativistic kill vehicle, missile batteries that could level small moons, and we made very, very sure that everyone knew the new rules. What rules? Drax asked. His voice sounded hollow, distant, like it was coming from someone else's throat. Simple ones, Commander. Do not attack hospital ships. Do not threaten medical personnel. Do not fire on vessels clearly marked with red crosses. Each sentence was delivered with the finality of a hammer blow. And if you are foolish enough, arrogant enough, stupid enough to test us well, then we are legally justified in defending ourselves with overwhelming force. The cold thing in Drax's stomach had grown teeth. You see, Commander, the Geneva Conventions protect us. They say no one can attack medical facilities. But they also permit us to protect ourselves. You just had the monumentally bad judgment to test which clause would apply. New contacts began appearing on the Talon's damaged sensors. Drax stared at the readings with growing horror. Sir, Kieran whispered, his voice breaking. Sir, those are more Krell ships. It's the rest of our patrol squadron. They must have heard the weapons fire and come to assist. 6 Krell warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, their weapons already charged, ready to avenge their sister ship. Ready to show these humans what happened when you damage Dominion property. Tell them to stand down, Drax said, but his voice was too quiet, too weak. He tried again, louder. Tell them to retreat. Broadcast on all frequencies. Tell them to withdraw immediately. Syleth worked frantically at her console, her hearing ridges vibrating with stress. Broadcasting now, sir. All frequencies, maximum power. Telling them to withdraw, telling them. But the squadron commander, a hot-headed officer named Talrex, who had always thought Drax was too cautious, too conservative, clearly saw only what he wanted to see. A human vessel that had damaged the flagship. An opportunity for glory. His response came back immediately, full of bravado and confidence and the kind of aggressive stupidity that Drax had once thought was courage. Talon of Supremacy, this is Strike Group 7. We are moving to engage the hostile vessel. Hold position. Reinforcements have arrived. We will teach these humans to respect Krell military power. You fools, Drax whispered, staring at the 6 ships on his display. You absolute fools. Captain Voss's voice returned, and now she sounded almost tired. Weary, like someone who had performed the same task too many times and was sick of the repetition. Commander Drax, I am going to give your friends the same warning I gave you. I hope they are smarter than you were. On the viewport, the hospital ship's weapons rotated with mechanical precision, tracking the new arrivals. The railgun began cycling again, capacitors glowing through that terrible rainbow sequence. But this time it was not alone. Missile batteries opened their tubes to vacuum. Energy projectors came online with barely visible distortions in space. Point defense systems primed with the soft whine of charging capacitors. In the span of 10 seconds, the Serenity's guard went from hospital ship to flying fortress of annihilation. Attention Krell Strike Group 7, Voss broadcast. Her voice was professional again. Calm. The voice of someone performing a duty they had performed before and would likely perform again. This is Captain Alara Voss of the UHMS Serenity's Guard. You are approaching a protected medical vessel that is currently engaged in lawful defensive action against an aggressor. If you enter weapons range, you will be treated as hostile combatants and engaged with lethal force. This is your only warning. Among the 6 ships was the cruiser Mercy's Claw, commanded by Captain Verena. She was older than Talrex Weiser, with enough combat experience to recognize a losing situation when she saw one. Talrex, her voice cut across the squadron frequency. Stand down. That's a direct order. We are outmatched. Outmatched by a medical ship. Talrex's laugh was ugly. Your cowardice is noted, Verena. All ships except Mercy's Claw, TAC formation Delta 7. We'll show these humans. I said stand down. Verena's ship began powering down its weapons. I am surrendering my vessel. I will not participate in this massacre. Traitor, Talrex screamed. Coward. I'll see you court-martialed for this. But before Verena could respond, before anyone could stop what happened next, Talrex did something that would haunt Drax for the rest of his life. He fired on her. Talrex's ship launched a full missile spread at the Mercy's Claw. Not at the human hospital ship, at his own comrade, at a Krell vessel that had been trying to save lives by surrendering. The missile struck before Verena could raise shields. The Mercy's Claw exploded in a brilliant flash, taking its entire crew of 300 with it. My God, a voice said over the human comm system. Not Voss, someone else. Female. Younger. They just killed their own. Drax recognized something in that voice. Horror. Genuine shock that anyone could be so consumed by pride that they would murder their allies rather than admit defeat. On the Talon's internal monitors, Drax could see the hospital ship's medical bay. And there, standing among the equipment, was a human woman in white scrubs marked with red crosses. Dark hair, Latina features, perhaps 30 years old. She was staring at a monitor showing the destruction of the Mercy's claw, her hand over her mouth. Dr. Elena Martinez, according to the name tag visible on the feed. She turned to someone off camera. Captain, did you see that he killed his own people? They're more afraid of looking weak than dying. Voss's response was cold. Then we'll accommodate their preference, Doctor. Return to your patients. This won't take long. Taurex's voice filled the comm channel again, defiant to the end. All ships fire at will, show no mercy to these human dogs. 5 Krell warships opened fire on the Serenity's guard. Captain Voss's response was methodical and terrible in its precision. The railgun spoke first. One shot, then another, then another. Each projectile aimed with computer-guided precision that accounted for relative velocity, gravitational effects, and evasive maneuvers before the targeted ships had even begun them. Talrek's flagship took the first round through the bridge. The tungsten slug entered through the forward viewport and exited through the main reactor core. The ship exploded 3 seconds later, spilling crew and atmosphere and debris across a sphere of space kilometers wide. Another cruiser's ammunition storage took a direct hit. The resulting detonation was visible even to the naked eye, a brief new star that burned for perhaps 5 seconds before collapsing into cooling wreckage. Missiles launched in coordinated swarms from the Serenity's guard. Not random fire, but calculated strikes targeting specific vulnerabilities. Sensor arrays, engine nodes, weapon emplacements, reducing combat-effective warships to drifting hulks in carefully orchestrated demolition. Energy projectors carved through armor, like surgical lasers through flesh. Precise, controlled, devastating. And through it all, Captain Voss's voice remained calm, professional, narrating the destruction like she was reading a medical chart. Target 1 mobility kill achieved. Target 2 catastrophic reactor failure. Target 3 magazine detonation. Target 4 structural failure amidships. Target 5 life support compromised. In the medical bay visible on Drax's monitor, Doctor. Martinez had turned away from the carnage. She was checking on patients. Drax could see them now, beings from multiple species lying in medical beds. Some were human, some were not. One appeared to be Krell. Drax watched as Martinez approached the Krell patient, adjusting an IV line with the same gentle care she would show anyone. The patient was young, unconscious, badly wounded. Dr. Martinez, someone said off camera. That one's Krell. Are you sure? He's a patient, Martinez said firmly. That's all that matters. Monitor his vitals and let me know if anything changes. She moved to the next bed without hesitation, treating a Torvan soldier with the same professional dedication. On the viewport, the last of Strike Group 7 was trying to escape. The ship's captain had finally realized the futility of fighting and was attempting to flee. The railgun tracked it with inhuman precision. One shot, the engine exploded. The ship went dead in space. Target 6 disabled but salvageable, Voss reported. Secure all hostile vessels. Medical teams prepare for casualty intake. The battle had lasted 8 minutes from first shot to last. 7 Krell warships, 1 destroyed by friendly fire, 5 more disabled or destroyed by the Serenity's guard. Only the Talon of Supremacy remained even partially functional, and that was only because Voss had chosen to leave it that way. Over 1,000 Krell crew members dead or dying, and the hospital ship still pristine white, still bearing its red crosses, floating serenely among the wreckage like an angel of death who had simply done what angels of death do. This concludes today's lesson, Commander Drax, Captain Voss said. Her voice had gone soft again, almost gentle, the kind of gentleness a teacher uses when explaining why a student failed. I hope you were paying attention. Drax stared at the destruction, at the bodies floating in space, at the shattered ships that had been moments ago the pride of the Krell military. And he realized with crushing clarity that he had not just lost a battle, he had started something that would change the entire galaxy. The Serenity's guard did not finish them off. In retrospect, Drax would realize that was the cruelest part of all. Captain Voss left them alive, crippled, humiliated, floating in the wreckage of their own stupidity and the corpses of their reinforcements. Left them to stare at the consequences of their arrogance written in twisted metal and frozen blood. She did, however, send over medical teams. The first indication came through Sileth's console, her hearing ridges twitching with confusion that bordered on disbelief. "Commander, we're being hailed again." "Bob, the hospital ship is requesting permission to dock." Drax stared at her. His broken arm throbbed with each heartbeat, sending waves of nausea through his system. Around him, the bridge was a disaster of sparking consoles, emergency lighting, and the acrid smell of burnt insulation and things that should not burn. "They want to dock," he repeated. The words made no sense. "With us." "Yes, sir. They're transmitting docking protocols, standard medical emergency procedures. They're asking how many wounded we have." "How many?" Drax felt something break inside him that was not his arm. Tell them we have over 500 casualties. Tell them our medical bay was on Deck 6. Deck 6, which no longer existed. Deck 6, which was now open to vacuum. Deck 6, where the ship's doctors and nurses had been treating minor injuries when the Railgun's first shot had turned them all to vapor. "Sir, they're sending shuttles regardless of our response. Multiple craft. They're already launching." Morven looked up from his console, his scarred face haggard with exhaustion and shock. Deep lines had appeared around his eyes that had not been there an hour ago. Should we try to stop them, Commander?" The question was absurd. They had no weapons, no shields, no ability to stop anything. But Drax understood what Morven was really asking. Do we have any dignity left to preserve, any honor left to defend? "Let them come," Drax said quietly. "We surrendered. They won. If they want to board us and finish what they started, we can't stop them." But the thought that ran through his mind, the one he could not voice, why would they come at all? "We tried to kill them. We fired on their ship. We deserve whatever they do to us." Except they did not come to finish anything. The first shuttle locked onto the Talon's starboard emergency airlock 23 minutes after the last shot was fired. Drax watched on the security feeds, half expecting to see combat troops in powered armor, Marines coming to secure the ship, soldiers coming to execute the survivors as a lesson to anyone who might make the same mistake. Instead, humans in white medical uniforms emerged. Not combat armor, not even light defensive gear. Just white fabric marked with those same red crosses, carrying equipment that was clearly medical in nature and nothing else. They moved with the kind of organized efficiency that spoke of extensive training and recent practice. A tall human male led the team, older, with hair that had gone mostly gray. Not white gray, like age might bring to a Krell, but silver gray, that somehow made him look distinguished rather than old. Perhaps 40 standard years, give or take. His face carried the kind of weathering that came from decades of difficult work under harsh conditions. He carried a medical scanner in one hand and a field surgical kit in the other. Behind him came nurses, orderlies, technicians, an entire trauma team deploying into a ship that had just been trying to kill them. Some were young, some were older. They represented multiple Earth ethnicities. Drax had studied enough human physiology to recognize the diversity. Dark skin, light skin, Asian features, Latino features, all wearing the same white uniforms, all carrying the same red crosses, all moving with the same professional purpose. The security feed showed them encountering the first group of wounded Krell, 3 engineering crew members who had been caught in the shockwave from the engine explosion. Burns covered 30% of their bodies. One was missing an arm, the limb sheared off by flying debris. Another had scales that had melted and fused together, creating patches of scar tissue that would never heal properly. The human team did not hesitate, did not pause to confirm these were enemies, did not check to see if their patients had fired the weapons that killed their colleagues. They just started treating them. Drax watched this on the flickering security monitor and felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of the universe. The lead human, his name tag read Dr. L. Graves, CMO, was setting the broken arm of a Krell weapons technician. The same technician who 30 minutes ago had been firing plasma cannons at the hospital ship. The human's hands moved with practiced precision, manipulating the fractured bone with firm but gentle pressure. "Easy," Graves said in passable Krell. His accent was terrible, but the intent was clear. "This is going to hurt, but I need to set it properly or you'll lose function." The technician nodded, tears streaming from his eyes, not from pain, from confusion. From the fundamental cognitive dissonance of being saved by the people he had tried to kill. 47 minutes later, the lead human arrived on the bridge. Dr. Lysander Graves took in the scene with a single professional glance. The damaged consoles, the injured crew, the commander standing at his post with a clearly broken arm held against his chest. His eyes were a pale gray blue, the kind that seemed to see more than they should, the kind that had witnessed things no one should have to see. Commander Drax, I presume? His voice carried a slight accent that Drax's translator identified as North American English, possibly Canadian. I'm Dr. Lysander Graves, Chief Medical Officer of the Serenity's Guard. That arm needs immediate attention. My crew, Drax began, is being treated as we speak. I have 4 surgical teams working through your ship, prioritizing based on medical need, not species or allegiance. Graves moved closer, setting down his kit with practiced ease. We've already stabilized 37 critical cases and evacuated them to our medical bay. Another 63 are being treated on site. But you're in command, which means you don't get to delay treatment until everyone else is handled. That's the kind of martyrdom that gets people killed. So sit down and let me work. It was not a request. Drax sat. Graves's hands moved with the kind of precision that came from performing the same procedures thousands of times. He injected something that made the pain recede to a distant throb, began manipulating the broken bone with gentle but firm pressure. This is going to hurt, he said, and then set the fracture with a motion that made Drax's vision white out for a moment. When clarity returned, Graves was already applying a medical cast that hardened almost instantly. Some kind of polymer compound that was probably more advanced than anything in the Krell medical inventory. It was warm against Drax's scales, conforming perfectly to the contours of his arm. Why? Drax asked. The word came out broken, ragged. Graves did not look up from his work. Why am I treating you? We tried to kill you. We fired on your ship. Drax swallowed against something in his throat that was not pain. Your people, the Florence's promise, 3 years ago. We killed them. Why are you saving us? The doctor's hands paused for just a moment, just long enough for Drax to see the tension in his shoulders, the tightening around his eyes. Then his hands continued their work, checking circulation, testing the cast's integrity. Because I'm a doctor, Commander. I took an oath. Do you know what it says? Drax shook his head. First, do no harm. Treat the sick. Preserve life. Provide comfort to the suffering. Graves looked up, and those pale eyes held something that was not forgiveness, but was not hatred either. Something more complicated, more human. Those words don't have an asterisk that says, accept your enemies, or unless they shot at you first. He stood wiping his hands on a cloth that came away stained with Krell blood. Every patient gets care. Ally enemy, it makes no difference. That's not weakness, Commander. That's the line between medicine and murder. But the Florence, I was there. The words cut through Drax's objection like a scalpel. On the Florence's promise, I was a junior surgeon, 38 years old. I watched them board, watched them execute my colleagues, watched them space patients I'd been treating for weeks. Graves stood packing his equipment with methodical precision, each movement controlled, professional, but Drax could see the tremor in his hands, the slight hesitation when he touched certain instruments. I watched a Krell soldier shoot Chief Nurse Williams through the head while she was trying to protect a patient who couldn't walk. I watched them drag Dr. Chen, he was 72 years old, been a surgeon for 40 years, drag him to the airlock and space him while he was still conscious. I watched them open the airlocks on Medical Bay 3 while I was hiding in a maintenance shaft. The bridge had gone silent. Every crew member who could hear was listening. I heard 400 people die in 90 seconds. Do you know what that sounds like? Commander, the screaming stops quickly in vacuum. The sounds humans make when the air is torn from their lungs. It's not like the vids, it's worse. Much worse. Graves closed his kit with a decisive snap. So yes, Commander, I know what your people did. I have nightmares about it every single night for 3 years. I wake up hearing those screams. I close my eyes and see Nurse Williams' face. I smell the smoke from the plasma burns on the bulkheads. He moved toward the exit, then paused. But if I let that turn me into someone who decides which patients deserve treatment based on what uniform they wear or what species they are, then they win. The people who massacred the Florence, they win, because they'll have turned me into exactly what they were. Graves looked back at Drax, and his expression was tired. So tired. The exhaustion of someone who had carried too much for too long. You're going home, Commander Drax. Captain Voss wants you alive. Wants you healthy enough to tell everyone what happens when you attack a human hospital ship. He paused at the door. But before you go, there's someone who wants to speak with you. Captain Alara Voss boarded the Talon personally. She arrived without escort, without weapons, wearing the same white uniform as her medical staff. The only concession to rank was the insignia on her collar, 3 stars, and the caduceus symbol of medical command. Her boots rang against the deck plating with a steady rhythm that somehow sounded like a funeral march. She was younger than Drax had imagined from her voice, perhaps early 40s. Dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun that was starting to come loose, strands escaping to frame a face that might have been attractive by human standards if it had not been carved from stone and controlled fury. She stopped 3 meters from where Drax stood at his ruined command station, looked around the damaged bridge with eyes that cataloged every detail, noted the injured crew members receiving treatment from her medical staff, counted the empty stations where personnel would never return, saw the scorch marks on the bulkheads, the bloodstains on the deck, the small personal effects scattered by the violence, a datapad here, a family photo there, a lucky charm that had not been lucky enough. 537, she said. Her voice was quieter than it had been over the comm, not soft but controlled, like someone holding a fusion reactor in their chest and refusing to let it detonate. That's how many of your crew we've confirmed dead. Another 219 wounded, 63 critical. Your ship is crippled, but salvageable. We've stabilized the hull breaches and restored minimal life support to all inhabitable sections. Drax said nothing. What could he say? Do you know how many people I killed today, Commander? The question struck like a physical blow. Voss's dark eyes, almost black in the emergency lighting, held him like targeting lasers. 741 Krell service members across 7 ships. I know the number exactly because I reviewed every casualty report personally. Every name, every position, every family they left behind when that information was available in your personnel files. She took one step closer. That's what command means, Commander. Owning the deaths you order. Not forgetting them, not dismissing them as collateral damage or acceptable losses. Knowing that 741 people went to sleep last night, not knowing they'd be dead by the next morning because their commanders made bad decisions. Another step. You attacked a hospital ship, Commander, a clearly marked, obviously protected medical vessel operating under every law and treaty that governs civilized warfare. You fired 3 times before we responded. You were given every opportunity to withdraw, to acknowledge your mistake, to choose differently. I didn't know, Drax heard himself say. The words sounded hollow even to his own ears. I didn't know you were armed. The treaties say medical ships are protected. Voss interrupted, and her voice carried the edge of someone who had this argument too many times and was tired of it. They also say we can defend ourselves. Article 35, Second Geneva Convention, Space Warfare Addendum, adopted 247 years ago. Ratified by 73 species, including the Krell Dominion in 2028. Her voice dropped to something quieter, more dangerous. You didn't know because you didn't bother to learn. She gestured at the viewport where the wreckage of Strike Group 7 drifted in the darkness like a graveyard of ambition and pride. 741 people learned differently today. Most of them are dead because their commanders made the same assumption you did. Because people like you and Talrex thought mercy was weakness and compassion was cowardice. The words settled like lead in Drax's chest. I'm sending you home, Voss continued. We'll repair your ship enough to make the journey. We'll provide medical support for your wounded. We'll transfer the dead with full honors because that's what the conventions require and because those people deserve dignity even if their commanders don't. She turned to leave, then stopped. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Not softer, but more personal, like she was talking to herself as much as to him. The Florence's Promise was my first posting. I was executive officer. 29 years old, youngest XO in the fleet. Her shoulders tensed. We had 4,000 patients. Humans, Torvin, Vraxian, Zothar. We had 83 Krell prisoners of war receiving treatment for injuries sustained at Kepler Station. Drax felt his blood turn cold. Your raiding party killed them all, the Krell prisoners included. They didn't care that those were their own people. Didn't care that we were treating them with the same skill and dedication we showed our own wounded. They just wanted to send a message about what happens to ships that treat the enemy. Voss looked back at him, and her eyes held something that was beyond anger, beyond hatred. Something that had been forged in fire and tempered in blood and hardened into a principle that would never break. So humanity sent a message back. We built ships like the Serenity's Guard, 37 of them spread across our medical fleet, each one capable of rendering aid to 6,000 patients, each one carrying defensive armaments sufficient to destroy battle groups if attacked. She paused, and for the first time since boarding, Drax saw something like emotion crack through her professional facade. "We meant what we said, Commander. We're still a hospital ship. We're still bound by the conventions. We're still committed to healing anyone who needs it. Right now in our medical bay, Dr. Martinez is performing surgery on a Krell ensign we pulled from the wreckage of one of your destroyed ships. She's been working on him for 47 minutes. She's going to save his life if she can, because that's what we do." Voss started walking again, her footsteps echoing in the damaged bridge. "But we will never be defenseless again. We will never again watch our patients die because we trusted that laws would protect us. We will defend ourselves. We will end threats. And we will do it with overwhelming force so that people like you understand the lesson the first time." She reached the exit, then turned one final time. "The Geneva Conventions are promises, Commander Drax. Promises that will save anyone who needs saving, and promises that will destroy anyone who threatens our ability to do that work." Then she was gone, leaving Drax alone with his thoughts, his pain, and the weight of 741 deaths that he had helped cause. The council chamber was ancient, older than the Dominion itself. Walls of black stone that had witnessed 1,000 councils, 10,000 judgments, 100,000 decisions that shaped the fate of billions. The ceiling stretched up into shadows so high that the emergency lighting barely reached it. Centuries of Krell history stared down from those walls, portraits of past chancellors, battle standards from conquered worlds, monuments to glory and conquest. Drax stood in the center of it all, and his arms still in the human medical cast. They had offered to remove it to replace it with Krell technology. He had refused. Let it serve as a reminder. Let everyone who saw him see the white polymer marked with red crosses. Let them know what human mercy looked like. The council sat in a semicircle of elevated thrones. 12 members, 12 pairs of eyes, 48 eyes total, all focused on him with varying degrees of anger, disgust, and cold calculation. At the center sat High Chancellor Zavrith. She was ancient, 83 cycles, which made her one of the oldest living Krell. 6 eyes instead of the usual 4, a genetic mutation that marked her bloodline as descended from the original royal house. Those eyes had gone cloudy with age, cataracts forming over centuries of life. But the mind behind them was sharp as broken glass and twice as cutting. "Commander Drax." Her voice was surprisingly strong for someone so old, carrying clearly across the vast chamber. "You stand before this council to answer for the loss of 7 warships and over 2,000 Krell lives." "Yes, High Chancellor." "You attacked a protected medical vessel in violation of interstellar law." "Yes, High Chancellor." "You ignored warnings from your veteran officers." "Yes, High Chancellor." "You escalated a situation that could have been resolved through communication into a military engagement that resulted in catastrophic losses." "Yes, High Chancellor." Zavrith leaned forward, her 6 eyes studying him with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. Drax could see the intelligence there, the cunning that had kept her in power for 47 cycles. She had not survived this long by being soft or sentimental. "And yet you survived. The humans showed you mercy." "Yes, High Chancellor," after demonstrating they did not need to. A murmur rippled through the council chamber. Drax could feel the weight of judgment pressing down from all sides. Counselors whispering to their aides. Scribes recording every word for the historical archives. His career was over. His life was likely over. The only question was how they would execute him. Quickly as a warrior, or slowly as a traitor who had brought shame upon the Dominion. "Tell us," Zavrith said, her voice deceptively gentle, "about the weapons this hospital ship carried." For the next hour, Drax testified. He described the railgun in painful detail, the specifications as best he understood them, the yield calculated from damage assessments, the precision that could strike a specific component from 50,000 kilometers away. The point defense systems that intercepted every missile, every plasma bolt with inhuman accuracy, the energy weapons that carved through armor like surgical instruments through flesh, the tactical sophistication that reduced a strike group to wreckage in 8 minutes. He described the transformation, how the white panels had retracted with mechanical precision, how weapons had emerged from what should have been cargo holds in medical bays, how a ship that looked peaceful and harmless had metamorphosed into something that made his warship look like a training vessel. He described Captain Voss's voice, calm, professional, narrating the destruction like she was reading patient charts. No anger, no hatred, just the cold execution of defensive protocol. And he described what came after. The medical teams, Dr. Graves setting his arm, the human doctors and nurses treating Krell wounded with the same care they would show their own people. The council listened with expressions that ranged from disbelief to horror, to on some faces a kind of grudging respect. When he finished, silence fell across the chamber. Not the silence of contemplation, but the heavy quiet of people processing something they did not want to believe. They showed you this power, one council member said, breaking the silence. Councillor Thex, a military hardliner who had advocated for aggressive expansion for decades, and then sent medical teams to save your crew. Yes, Counselor. They could have destroyed you completely, but chose to let you live. Yes, Counselor. Captain Voss said she wanted me to return home, to tell everyone what happens when you attack human medical vessels. More murmuring. The council members exchanged glances, communicating in the subtle ways that came with decades of political maneuvering. Zavrith raised one weathered claw, and silence fell instantly. The gesture spoke of absolute authority, the kind earned over nearly a century of life. Commander Drax, do you know why the Florence's Promise was attacked 3 years ago? The question caught him off guard. High Command declared it a legitimate target, Chancellor, for treating enemy combatants. Yes, High Command did declare that. Zavrith's 6 eyes glittered in the chamber's dim light. Do you know who gave that order? Drax felt something cold settle in his stomach. I did, Zavrith said. I authorized Assault Group 12 to board and neutralize what I deemed a strategic enemy asset. I approved the mission parameters. I awarded the medals afterward. I called it brilliant tactics in my address to this very council. The chamber had gone absolutely silent. Drax could hear his own breathing, the slight wheeze from where he had bruised his ribs in the attack. Could hear the scratch of scribes' pens recording this moment for history. I was wrong. 3 words. 3 words that Drax had never heard from High Command in his entire military career. 3 words that seemed to shake the very foundations of the chamber. We thought making an example would terrorize the humans, force them to abandon their weak-minded policies about treating enemy wounded, show them that their precious conventions had no power in the real galaxy. Zavrith stood moving with the careful precision of someone whose body was failing, but whose will remained iron. We thought we were demonstrating strength, teaching them a lesson about the consequences of helping our enemies. She moved down from her throne, approaching Drax with slow, measured steps. Her claws clicked against the stone floor, each step echoing in the vast chamber. Instead, we gave them justification. We handed them a reason, a legal, moral, unassailable reason to arm their hospital ships. We transformed their medical fleet from easy targets into the most dangerous non-combat vessels in known space. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the cataracts clouding her eyes, the age spots on her scales, the weight of decades carried in every movement. You lost 7 ships, Commander. But you learned something this council needs to understand, something I have been too proud to acknowledge for 3 years. Her 6 eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him want to look away. The humans are not weak. Their compassion is not a flaw. Their rules are not restrictions that limit them. Each sentence landed like a hammer blow. They are promises, promises that they will save lives whenever possible, and promises that they will end lives when necessary. Zavrith turned to face the full council, her voice rising to fill the chamber. We tested which promise would apply. 7 ships and over 2,000 lives later, we have our answer. She returned to her throne, settling into it with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of empires. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, not softer but more formal, the voice of someone pronouncing judgment. Commander Drax, you will not be executed for your failure. Relief and confusion warred in Drax's chest. Death would be mercy. Death would be the easy path, the honorable warrior's end. Zavrith's eyes held him without blinking. And you, Commander, do not deserve mercy. You do not deserve the easy path. The cold thing returned, settling deep in his bones. You are hereby designated living archive of human capacity. A new rank created specifically for you and any future officers who make similar errors. You will be assigned to Observation Post 47 on the outer rim of our territory. Your only duty will be to monitor all vessels passing through that sector. She paused, letting the words sink in. And whenever a human medical ship transits, which they do regularly on their civilian mercy missions to border worlds, you will warn every Krell vessel in range to maintain distance and show respect. You will tell your story. You will describe what happened when you attacked the Serenity's guard. You will ensure that no other Krell commander makes your mistake. Zavrith's voice dropped to something quieter, more personal. You will live, Commander Drax. You will live for decades. Possibly 4 or 5 more cycles if your health holds. And every single day you will remember this moment. You will remember the faces of the 2,000 crew members who died because you were too arrogant to listen to your sergeant's warnings, too proud to learn about the laws you were supposed to uphold, too certain of your own superiority to recognize strength when it wore a white uniform and red crosses. She raised her voice again, projecting to the entire council. This is your punishment, to serve as a living reminder of what happens when we mistake human compassion for weakness, to ensure that no other Krell officer suffers the consequences of our collective ignorance. Drax felt his legs weaken. Death would have been kinder. Death would have been easier. A quick execution, his name added to the rolls of fallen warriors, his family allowed to grieve and move on. Living with this shame for the rest of his natural life, carrying the weight of 2,000 deaths, being forced to relive his failure every time he gave his warning, that was cruelty on a scale he had not imagined the council capable of. Do you accept this assignment, Commander? What choice did he have? Yes, High Chancellor. Then this council is adjourned. Zavrith gestured to the guards. Take him to the transport. He departs for post 47 within the hour. As the guards approached, Zavrith's voice stopped them. One more thing, Commander. Drax looked up. Among the dead from your ship, there was a pilot, Vorath, talented young officer, only 24 cycles old. Her 6 eyes held his. He had a family, a mate, a young hatchling, barely 3 years old. The words hit Drax like a plasma bolt to the chest. That child will grow up without a father because you gave the order to attack. Remember that too. The conference chamber was the largest Drax had ever seen, even on the monitor at observation post 47. Designed to accommodate representatives from over 100 species, it was a monument to galactic cooperation, or at least the appearance of it. Curved tiers of seats rising toward a domed ceiling that simulated a starfield. Translation booths lining the walls. Holographic displays floating in the air showing legal documents and technical specifications in dozens of languages simultaneously. Drax watched the proceedings from his small quarters on the observation post. The station was cramped, barely larger than a heavy shuttle. Minimal crew rotation, usually just him and 2 junior officers at any given time. Nothing but sensor arrays and communications equipment and endless hours of watching ships pass by. A year of this, a year of isolation. A year of telling his story to every Krell captain who questioned why they had to maintain such distance from human medical vessels. The summit had been humanity's idea. In the year since the engagement at Sector 79 Alpha, 7 more incidents had occurred. Other species testing the boundaries. Other commanders making Drax's mistake. The Vraxian Empire had lost 3 ships when a battlecruiser captain decided the white crosses were camouflage. The Torvan Confederacy had lost 5 when a Commodore thought he could disable a hospital ship and hold the patients hostage for negotiations. The Zathar clans had lost an entire raiding squadron, 12 ships, when a warlord thought the medical vessels were soft targets for easy glory. None had survived to tell about it. The human delegates stood at the central podium. Ambassador Helena Park, no relation to Chief Engineer James Park of the Serenity's Guard, as far as Drax knew, though the similarity in names had confused him initially. She was civilian diplomatic corps wearing formal attire instead of military uniform. But she spoke with the kind of authority that made career soldiers sit up straight. We propose an amendment to the Geneva Conventions, she was saying, her voice transmitted across subspace to every major world in the galaxy. A formal acknowledgement that medical vessels may carry defensive armaments proportional to the threat environment they operate in. The Vraxian representative stood, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights into rainbow patterns. You ask us to legitimize weapons on hospital ships. How do we know these weapons will be used only defensively? Ambassador Park's response was immediate and unflinching. You don't. You have to trust us. The same way we have to trust that you won't attack clearly marked medical facilities. She paused. The same way we trusted that trust for 400 years before it was violated. And if that trust is violated, the Vraxian's voice carried skepticism. If these armed hospital ships abuse their protected status, then we respond. The same way we responded to the Florence's Promise massacre. The same way we responded to the 7 subsequent attacks on our medical fleet. Park's voice hardened, edges of steel showing beneath the diplomatic polish. We gave mercy when mercy was warranted. We delivered justice when our healers were threatened. We will continue to do both. That is the bargain we offer. Another representative stood, Torvan Confederacy, a species known for careful legal analysis and bureaucratic precision. What guarantees do we have that these armed hospital ships will actually provide medical care? What stops them from being warships disguised as medical vessels? Park touched a control and holographic displays appeared throughout the chamber. Patient manifests, treatment records, inspection protocols, pages and pages of documentation that would satisfy even Torvin lawyers. Every hospital ship in the human fleet is subject to random inspection by neutral parties. We maintain detailed logs of every patient treated regardless of species or allegiance. Our medical personnel are required by law and regulation to provide care to anyone who requested enemy or ally. These are not suggestions. They are regulations enforced by our own military tribunal. The displays showed statistics, numbers that Drax had seen before in the briefings he had been forced to review. The Serenity's Guard alone had treated over 6,000 patients in the past year. Humans, yes, but also Krell, Torvin, Vraxian, Zuthar, Betelgeuse, Andromedian. Even species that were technically in a state of hostility with humanity. 317 Krell wounded had been treated on human hospital ships in the past year. All had been returned to Krell space after recovery. All had reported professional, competent medical care. None had reported any abuse or mistreatment beyond the occasional language barrier. We are not asking permission to turn our hospital ships into weapons of war, Park continued, and her voice carried genuine emotion now. Not anger, not defensiveness, just conviction. We are asking recognition of our right to defend the people who dedicate their lives to healing. The doctors, the nurses, the medics who run into danger while everyone else runs away. She gestured at the statistics floating in the air. In the past year, human medical vessels have treated over 40,000 patients from 63 different species. We have provided emergency care in disaster zones. We have responded to distress calls from ships that had been trying to kill us hours before. We have maintained our commitment to the Geneva Conventions even as others violated them. Her voice rose, filling the chamber. 3 years ago, we lost 4,000 people because we trusted that galactic law would protect them. It didn't. So we made a choice. We would continue to trust in those laws, continue to honor those conventions, continue to provide care to anyone who needed it. But we would also ensure we could protect ourselves if that trust was violated again. The Zathar warlord stood, his massive frame dwarfing the podium designed for smaller species. His species valued strength above all else, honor through combat, respect through victory. The Zathar clans respect strength, he rumbled in a voice like grinding stone. What you propose is not weakness disguised as mercy. It is mercy backed by overwhelming force. This, he paused, considering, this we can accept. This we can respect. One by one, the representatives stood. Some enthusiastically, some reluctantly, but they stood. The Vraxian Empire, still smarting from their losses, had agreed after extracting promises of inspection protocols. The Torvin Confederacy agreed after analyzing the legal framework for 3 hours and concluding it was sound. Even the Krell delegation, not Zavreth herself, but a junior counselor sent in her place, stood and agreed. Because what choice did they have? They had learned the lesson. They had paid the price. By the end of the session, 53 species had signed what came to be known as the Nightingale Protocol, an amendment to the Geneva Conventions that explicitly permitted medical vessels to carry defensive armaments while maintaining their protected status. The trade-off was transparency, inspection rights, detailed manifests, proof that these ships were genuinely providing medical care and not using their protected status as a shield for military operations. Humanity accepted every condition because they had nothing to hide. The treaty included specific provisions. Hospital ships could carry weapons, but only defensive systems. No long-range strategic weapons, no offensive capabilities beyond what was needed to protect the vessel itself. All hospital ships must maintain patient logs available for inspection, must accept spot inspections from neutral parties, must prove they were actually providing medical care. Any hospital ship that abused its protected status would lose that protection. The offending nation would face sanctions. The ship would be reclassified as a military vessel and treated accordingly. In exchange, all signatory species agreed to maintain minimum distances from hospital ships, agreed never to fire on clearly marked medical vessels, agreed that doing so was a war crime subject to prosecution. It was, Drax realized as he watched the signatures appear on the holographic document, a masterpiece of diplomatic maneuvering. Humanity had turned their greatest tragedy into a legal framework that protected medical personnel across the galaxy. They had taken the massacre of the Florence's Promise and used it to make the galaxy safer for healers everywhere. Because now it wasn't just human hospital ships that could be armed. Any species could apply the same doctrine. Any nation could build ships like the Serenity's Guard. The treaty made it legal, made it acceptable, made it normal. Within 5 years, over 200 hospital ships from 40 different species would be operating under the Nightingale Protocol, each one a promise to save lives, each one a warning to anyone who might threaten those lives. Drax watched it all from his lonely post at the edge of known space and understood finally what Captain Voss had tried to teach him. The humans had not abandoned their principles. They had enforced them. They had taken their rules and made them real. They had proven that you could be both merciful and dangerous, both compassionate and lethal. They had weaponized mercy itself, and the galaxy would never be the same. The years had not been kind to Drax. His scales had gone completely gray, the color of ash and old bones. 3 of his 4 eyes required optical enhancement to function properly, the cybernetics visible as silver circuitry around the lenses. His joints ached with the kind of deep pain that came from age rather than injury, the kind that no amount of medication could fully suppress. But he remained at his post, watching, waiting, warning. 20 years. 20 years of isolation broken only by brief crew rotations. 20 years of telling his story. 20 years of watching ship after ship pass through his sector, always maintaining that respectful distance from the white vessels with red crosses. 20 years of remembering. A soft chime indicated a new contact entering the sector. Drax checked the readings with the automatic precision of 2 decades of repetition. His hands moved over the controls without conscious thought, muscle memory developed through endless repetition. Large displacement, white hull, red crosses. His hearts, both of them, began beating faster. Even after 20 years, the sight of those crosses made his pulse quicken, made his claws flex, made old instincts scream warnings that he had learned too late. "Ensign Rethick," he called to the young officer manning the communication station. The Krell was young, too young, fresh from the academy with scales that still held their brightness and eyes that had never seen real combat. 24 cycles old, the same age Vorath had been. He looked up from his console with the kind of eager attention that reminded Drax painfully of Lieutenant Kieran. Kieran, who had died 3 months after returning home. Complications from radiation exposure sustained when the railgun punched through the Talon's reactor shielding. Just another name on the list of people whose deaths Drax carried. "Yes, Commander. What is our protocol when a human medical vessel transits this sector?" "Minimum distance of 10,000 kilometers, sir. No active scans, no weapons locks, no communication unless they initiate." Rethick recited it perfectly, the words drilled into every Krell officer since the Nightingale Protocol. "Violation results in immediate court-martial and execution." "Good. Make sure every ship in range knows that protocol, and log the medical ship's transit for the historical record." "Already broadcasting, sir. All ships are acknowledging and adjusting course to maintain proper distance." Drax returned his attention to the viewport where the hospital ship was becoming visible to the naked eye. This one was called the Florence's Promise, the second ship to bear that name, rebuilt and recommissioned 7 years after the original's destruction. Humanity's statement that no massacre would erase their commitment to saving lives. It gleamed white against the black of space, those red crosses visible even at this distance. Larger than the original, more modern. Probably carrying even more sophisticated defensive systems than the Serenity's guard had possessed 20 years ago. A flying fortress of mercy and retribution. Sir Rethick's voice carried uncertainty, the tone of someone about to question orders, not sure if they should. "If I may ask, why are these protocols so strict? It's just one ship, a medical ship. Surely we could at least scan it to verify its cargo." Drax turned slowly, fixing all 4 of his cybernetically enhanced eyes on the young ensign. He had been expecting this question. Got it from every new officer who rotated through the post. They always asked eventually. The young ones who had been hatchlings when it happened, who only knew the Nightingale Protocol as a regulation to memorize, not a lesson written in blood. "Come here, Rethick." The younger Krell approached, his posture betraying nervousness. His scales showed the slight color shift that indicated uncertainty. Good. Fear was the beginning of wisdom. Drax had learned that lesson 20 years too late. "You see that ship?" Drax pointed at the viewport with a claw that had started to curl with arthritis. "That beautiful, peaceful-looking ship with its friendly crosses and its promise of healing." "Yes, sir." "You stay away from it. You do not scan it. You do not approach it. You do not even think aggressive thoughts in its general direction." Rethick's confusion was evident in the way his secondary eyes widened. "But sir, regulations state we should verify all vessels entering our territory." "Listen to me very carefully." Drax's voice dropped to something low and hard, the tone he had used when giving combat orders on the Talon of Supremacy. "That ship is a promise. Two promises, actually, and you need to understand both of them. He gestured at the white vessel drifting serenely past their observation post. Promise one, if you are wounded, if you are sick, if you need medical care, they will save you. They will treat you with the same skill and dedication they show their own people. They will not ask what species you are, or what uniform you wear, or which side you fought for. They will simply heal you because that is what they do. Drax moved closer to the viewport, his reflection ghostly against the blackness of space. An old Krell, gray and worn, staring at a ship that represented everything he had misunderstood. Promise two. If you attack them, if you threaten their patience, if you fire on their ship even once, they will end you with a precision and violence that will make your ancestors weep. Sir, I don't understand. How can both be true? Because humans are not like us, Ensign. We think strength and compassion are opposites. We think if you're strong, you can't be kind. If you're kind, you must be weak. Drax shook his head, feeling the weight of 20 years of regret. But humans weaponized mercy itself. They turned compassion into armor. They made their rules of war into the most dangerous doctrine in the galaxy. The Florence's promise was almost past them now, continuing its journey to whatever world needed its services. Probably responding to a distress call from a mining colony hit by an asteroid strike, or a plague outbreak on a frontier world, or any of 100 other disasters that required medical intervention. They would go. They would save lives. They would ask nothing in return except that no one attack them while they worked. And if anyone did attack them, 20 years ago, Drax said quietly, I made the mistake of thinking a hospital ship was an easy target. I thought their white paint and red crosses were signs of weakness. I thought their commitment to healing made them vulnerable. His voice carried the weight of 2 decades of regret, 2 decades of remembering faces, 2 decades of carrying names. I was wrong about everything. That hospital ship destroyed 7 of our best warships in 8 minutes, killed over 2,000 crew members with precision that still haunts my nightmares. And this is the part you need to understand, Ensign, then they sent medical teams to save the survivors. Rethik's eyes had gone wide. This was not the sanitized version they taught at the academy. This was raw, personal, real. They saved us, the same people we had just tried to kill. They treated our wounded with the same care they would show their own. They rebuilt our ship enough to get us home. They transferred our dead with full military honors. Drax turned to face the young officer, directly making sure Rethik could see the sincerity in all 4 of his eyes. I am alive because they kept both promises. They ended the threat I represented, and then they saved my life, both at the same time. The hospital ship disappeared from the viewport, continuing on its mission of mercy to wherever in the galaxy someone needed healing, leaving behind only the faint glow of its engines and the memory of what it represented. That is why we maintain distance, Ensign. Not because we fear them, though we should, but because we respect them. Because they earned that respect with blood and fire and an unshakable commitment to principles that most species only pretend to honor. Rethik stood silent for a long moment, processing this. His scales had shifted to a darker hue, the Krell equivalent of deep thought. Did you ever regret it, sir, attacking them? Every single day for 20 years. Drax's voice was quiet now, tired. The exhaustion of someone who had carried too heavy a burden for too long. That's my punishment. Not execution, not imprisonment, living with the knowledge of what I did, living with the faces of everyone who died because I was too arrogant to listen to warnings, too proud to learn, too stupid to recognize strength when it wore a white uniform. He returned to his station, settling into the chair that had become more familiar than any home. The seat had worn grooves that matched his body perfectly. 20 years of sitting, 20 years of watching, 20 years of warning. The Red Cross means they will heal you, Ensign. It also means if you attack them, you will learn the difference between protection and pacifism. The younger Krell nodded slowly, his scales showing the slight color shift that indicated he understood, or at least that he thought he understood. True understanding only came through experience, and Drax prayed to gods he barely believed in that Rethik would never have to learn that lesson the way he had. I understand, sir. I'll make sure the protocols are followed. See that you do? Drax called up the next set of sensor readings, resuming the endless watch that would be his duty until age or illness finally claimed him, because the next commander who makes my mistake won't survive to regret it. Hours later, when the shift changed and Rethik prepared to leave, the young ensign paused at the door. His hand hovered over the control panel, hesitation evident in every line of his posture. Commander, one more question if I may. Speak. Was it worth it, learning that lesson? Drax was quiet for a long time, staring at the empty space where the hospital ship had passed, remembering plasma fire and railgun projectiles, remembering Kieran's voice cracking as he reported casualties, remembering the screams of the wounded, remembering Dr. Graves' steady hands setting his broken arm, remembering Captain Voss's cold fury, remembering, always remembering. No, he said finally, but it was necessary. For me, for the Dominion, for every species that thought human compassion was weakness. He looked at Rethik with all four eyes, making sure the young officer understood. Sometimes the most important lessons are the ones that cost everything to learn. The ensign nodded and left his footsteps echoing in the small corridor beyond, leaving Drax alone again. Alone with his monitors, his memories, his ghosts. But mostly he was alone with a question that had been haunting him for 20 years. A question that had no answer, but demanded to be asked anyway. He pulled up a personnel file, one he had reviewed 1,000 times, one he should have deleted years ago, but couldn't bring himself to erase. Pilot Vorath, age at death 24 cycles. Survived by mate Serana and son Rethik. Son Rethik. Drax looked at the door where the young ensign had just departed, looked at the file, looked at the door again. No, it couldn't be. But the age was right, 24 cycles old. The same age Vorath had been when he died, born the year before the battle at Sector 79 Alpha. The breeding patterns matched. Vorath's mate Serana had been from the northern provinces. Rethik's accent carried traces of northern dialect. Drax's claws trembled over the controls as he pulled up Rethik's full personnel record. The information he should have reviewed when the ensign first arrived 3 months ago but hadn't, because what was the point? Junior officers rotated through. They learned their lessons. They moved on. Why bother learning their backgrounds when they would be gone in 6 months? Personnel record. Ensign Rethik, son of Vorath. The words hit him like a railgun slug. Father Pilot Vorath, deceased 2457, Battle of Sector 79, Alpha Mother Serana, of the Northern Provinces. Education. Northern Military Academy, graduated with honors. The screen blurred. Drax realized his eyes were leaking moisture. Not tears. Krell didn't cry the way humans did, but the physiological stress response of intense emotion. For 3 months, he had been teaching Vorath's son, training the offspring of a man who had died because of Drax's orders, and he hadn't known. Hadn't bothered to check, hadn't cared enough to look beyond the surface. 3 months. How many times had he looked at Rethik and seen the young pilot's features reflected in the son's face? How many times had he noticed the similarity in their eager attitudes, their desire to prove themselves, their bright-eyed enthusiasm for duty? And he hadn't known. Drax sat back in his chair, feeling something break inside him that had been holding together for 20 years through sheer force of will. He had thought his punishment was to warn other ships, to serve as a living monument to failure, to spend decades in isolation remembering his mistakes. But this was something else entirely. This was the universe showing him that his sins were not abstract, not just numbers on a casualty report, not just faces in his nightmares. This was the universe putting a name and a face to the consequences of his arrogance, making him teach and mentor and care about the son of a man he had killed. And the cruelest part Rethik didn't know. The young ensign had no idea that the old commander training him was the one who had given the order that orphaned him. Didn't know that every lesson Drax taught was paid for with his father's blood. Should he tell him? Should he explain? Or would that be just another form of selfishness, unburdening his own guilt by forcing Rethik to carry the knowledge? Drax sat there for hours staring at the personnel file, wrestling with a question that had no good answer. Finally, as the station's chronometer ticked past midnight, he made his decision. He would tell him. Not now, not yet, but eventually, when Rethik was ready to hear it. When the young officer had learned enough about duty and sacrifice and the weight of command that he could understand why Drax had done what he did. Not to excuse it, never to excuse it, but to explain it, to ensure that Rethik never made the same mistakes, to turn his father's death into a lesson that might save others. It was not redemption. Drax knew he would never have that, could never have that, did not deserve that. But it was something. A small measure of meaning extracted from senseless tragedy. A way to honor Vorath's memory by ensuring his son became the kind of officer his father had been trying to be. Drax closed the file and returned to his watch. Outside the viewport, stars wheeled in their eternal dance. Ships passed through his sector, maintaining proper distance from the white vessels with red crosses. The galaxy moved on indifferent to one old Krell's pain. But somewhere out there, the Florence's promise was saving lives. Dr. Martinez was probably performing surgery right now, healing someone who needed healing. Captain Voss was probably reviewing patient manifests, ensuring her ship maintained the standards that the Nightingale Protocol demanded. And other hospital ships were doing the same. Hundreds of them now. Vessels from dozens of species all following the model humanity had created, all keeping both promises. We will heal you. We will destroy anyone who tries to stop us. Drax understood now. After 20 years, he finally understood. The humans had not turned mercy into a weapon. They had turned mercy into a principle worth defending with weapons. They had drawn a line in space and declared that some things were sacred. Some people were off limits. Some work was too important to be interrupted by violence. And they had backed that declaration with the kind of force that made the declaration real. That was the lesson. Not that compassion was weakness, not that rules were restrictions, but that principles meant nothing unless you were willing to defend them. That mercy meant nothing unless you had the strength to protect those who showed it. That civilization itself was a fragile thing that required constant vigilance and occasional violence to preserve. The humans had learned that lesson in blood, on the Florence's promise, in the screaming darkness of opened airlocks and executed healers, and they had made sure the galaxy learned it too. Drax's shift ended 4 hours later. Rithik returned to relieve him, bright-scaled and eager, full of questions about sensor calibration and protocol call enforcement. And Drax taught him, patiently, carefully, with all the wisdom that 20 years of regret could provide, teaching Vorath's son to be better than Drax had been. It would have to be enough.